Invincible betrays its own expectations. What does that even mean? I'm sure many of you came into this video seeing the thumbnail and title with your pitchforks and torches at the ready, but just give me a chance here. This video isn't to say that Invincible is a horrible show or you have bad taste for liking it. Heck, I enjoy Invincible, and I'm excited for Season 4 and beyond. But I do want to point out how much we've lost since the beginning of this series and how much untapped potential it has. So what do I mean when I say Invincible has betrayed its own expectations? Expectations are the promises a series gives when it first begins, things we, the audience, can hope for in the future, and aspects the writers strive to achieve and shine a light on. In Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you have the expectation of 4 children exploring a new world full of magic and adventure. And wouldn't you know, the rest of the book does an excellent job of living up to that expectation. Invincible at its inception was rich in many categories of expectation, some of which the series has lived up to, and others not so much. The 3 main points of expectation I would like to cover in this video are, number 1, does this show stay consistent with how it introduces powers and how people treat them? Number 2, do characters which are introduced as nuanced, multifaceted, and having agency remain as such, or do they become plot tools for the writers? And number 3, does the plot maintain its initial quality and stakes, or does it begin to heavily fluctuate? While I won't go over every power, character, or plot point / stake in this series, I want to mainly draw a comparison where Invincible started with these things, or the expectation it set up, and how these aspects are currently being handled in the Invincible show. Obviously, from my title and thumbnail, you can see that I argue that each of these does not hold up to the original expectations set, hence how it betrays them. As always, this is an analysis of the Invincible show and not the comic book. This video will only cover what has so far been animated. So if you feel the comic book fixes many of these issues, that's fantastic. But that does not apply to the critiques in this video. Let's dive in.
Guess who's finally getting his powers?
Are you sure?
In episode 1, Invincible took the time to consider the preposterous nature of heroes. Casual conversations of attacks on the president, large-scale bank robberies in the middle of the day with gunfights, alien invasions, and so on. But it also had a thread of realism sewn throughout the story. Conversations of 2 guards about a stepson overcoming crime and drugs to live a better life. Familial relationships and conversations that don't show a superhero family, but a pretty normal one. Over the top yet grounded, it was the staple of Invincible, taking these larger-than-life concepts and bringing them down to a somehow relatable and relatively realistic level. When it comes to the actual abilities of characters, Invincible also dared to bring them within the ballpark of their logical conclusion, hence why it gets so violent and gory. This doesn't mean the show measures things down to a science like factoring mass, acceleration, or force, but instead asks a question like, what would actually happen if superheroes fought? It's this reasoning that leads to heads popping, bodies being ripped apart, and cataclysmic property damage because Invincible dares to ask this question. But the series doesn't stop there. In episode 1, we have Red Rush, who when moving people at high speeds causes them to throw up because of how fast they shifted. If it went all the way logically, these people would have died from suddenly accelerating and decelerating this quickly because their organs would smash into their chest and spine, thereby rupturing. But it's acknowledging that moving that fast is not good for normal people, bringing a level of realism into the series. Not fully realistic, but acknowledging realism. This is the same episode that Red Rush talks about how he perceives time, how a conversation can feel like hours to him. He lives in a world that's standing almost still, and it uses this explanation of his powers to ground him and showcase his human side with his wife. This show actually considers what life is like for these superpowered individuals. This is Invincible setting up the parameters of suspension of disbelief, the rules of its universe. Suspension of disbelief is like a meter you have to keep within certain limitations, but those parameters are set up by the writers. The more rules one has in their series, the tighter the acceptable range becomes. For example, a series marketed as an accurate historical retelling of the Revolutionary War needs to make sure they have everything just about perfect. The events that happened, correct clothing, accents, technology, language, and more. Anything out of place, such as a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber wiping out a British base, can instantly land them outside of those parameters, thereby shattering suspension of disbelief. Compare that to a soft magic system fantasy series like Harry Potter, where twists and turns can be pulled out of almost anywhere and the story can just roll with it. You can introduce a fairy that eats dust and crafts gold, and it works because the rules of Harry Potter are so loose, allowing the author to make a fun, free-flowing adventure full of twists and turns as long as it resides within the category of magic. Introduce aliens in the universe and you'll probably have some problems because that exceeds the scope of magic and falls more into sci-fi. There are still rules, just less. Now, I'm not giving all this backdrop to say Invincible has a ton of rules and a very tight window of suspension of disbelief. No, it really doesn't. But it does have some rules, like what I pointed out earlier, taking powers within ballpark of their logical conclusion and considering their relatively realistic consequences. We can see this further in episode 1 when Omni-Man gives Mark a flying lesson. Rather than just most series where having the power of flight is as deep as it sounds, Invincible goes out of its way to make sure we understand how flying works for Viltrumites, that they create their own leverage, allowing them to shift through space seamlessly, and that flying is like tensing a muscle. It can become exhausting if done for too long or too fast, which also means flight can be trained to become faster and more precise. This tracks with what the show has been setting up so far. Mark doesn't just fly, there are reasons and implications behind it. We even get the peeing your pants scene where Omni-Man describes how unnatural it can feel to relax your flying muscle, which brings in a strangely understandable way for us to think about flying. While these powers are supernatural, a string of logic is also applied to them. Mark flying too low throws the desert into chaos. They break sound barriers. Mark passes out when flying too high, which cuts off his oxygen, and landing improperly causes craters. We can see this logic culminate at the end of episode 1 where Omni-Man massacres the Guardians. For each Guardian, it really only takes 1 to 2 blows for Omni-Man to take them out, further establishing how insanely powerful he is, following the string of logic of what would happen if you were hit by a superhuman like Omni-Man. Hence the gore. But with the same token, the series shows the fight could have gone the other way if Red Rush played his cards differently and didn't overcommit. There are 3 instances where he stopped Omni-Man from killing his squad mates, and it isn't until Red Rush goes on the offensive that he is caught. You may say Red Rush getting caught is bullcrap, he's significantly faster, and my argument of ballpark logical consistency is unfounded, but there's a couple things to consider here. Omni-Man is capable of super speed, which he stated himself earlier in the episode. Obviously, Red Rush is faster than him, at least in these short bursts, or else he wouldn't outpace Omni-Man as he does in the scene. Second, the series actually showcases Red Rush slowing down to strike his opponent. You can actually see him and not just the red blur right before the moment of impact. Look how this is different compared to when just redirecting Omni-Man's fist, which, following ballpark logical consistency, makes sense. Moving at top speed to strike something would break Red Rush's arms, which we actually see later when he's punching Omni-Man at high speed. Does this give perfect justification as why he gets caught? No, you could still make a very good argument for why Red Rush shouldn't have been caught. But it does give ample reasoning, showcasing how much thought was placed into this fight scene and the abilities each of the characters have. Remember how I said suspension of disbelief is a meter? I'd argue that the writers, while not hitting dead center on the meter here, still hit within the bounds of suspension of disbelief for this scene that has been set up by the rest of the episode. It is an incredible, brutal, and captivating fight scene. I doubt there were many people that watched this scene and didn't immediately click next episode, but a lot of the series later on loses this and more. Let's first do a comparison between the episode 1 fight and a fight from episode 1 of season 3 where Invincible and Eve fight against Doc Seismic. In Omni-Man's fight against the Guardians, things move very quickly. 3 times he's stopped by Red Rush from taking out a Guardian, one of which was a sneak attack. So Omni-Man shifts to focusing on Red Rush to eliminate their defensive capability. After taking him out, Martian-Man attacks Omni-Man's blind spot, tying Omni-Man up, allowing for him to be struck by the slower Immortal and War Woman. Regaining his bearings, Omni-Man breaks free from the Martian's grasp, overwhelms War Woman, who's doing the most damage per hit with speed, but is interrupted by Darkwing before he can get a kill shot off. The rest of the fight takes place in the same way, each move having a consequence and a reaction from the other side. Almost every move in this fight we can see the thought process of the characters. Except this dive kick, that was just dumb. Omni-Man even uses the bodies of his opponents as a shield or distractions, and ends up killing one of the Guardians with War Woman's weapon. This fight is so tightly knit and focused, with each character desperately attempting to make the right decision and being heavily punished when they make a mistake, The atmosphere is tense and serious, matching the dire situation the Guardians find themselves in. Now the fight against Doc Seismic starts with, well, monologuing. Almost every hero's life is at stake, and Invincible and Eve just sit around listening to Doc and cracking one-liners at him. This is a hostage situation. What are you doing? And why are you asking him to release the heroes rather than just doing it yourself? One of you take Doc, the other free the heroes. Easy peasy. This is like an FBI raiding a hostage situation, finding the perpetrator and asking him, while putting away their guns, to release the hostages that are sitting handcuffed in the corner of the room in plain view. Just get them out of there. After Doc threatens them and thereby all the other heroes, they wait about 40 seconds, floating about 10 yards away from Doc as he summons all of his forces, ultimately allowing themselves to be surrounded. Why didn't you grab Doc during this time? They then, rather than focusing on the heroes they are there to free or Doc who is controlling the centipedes, fight the centipedes. Mark punches the centipedes a couple of times and, realizing his punches aren't working, continues to punch them. And after landing his big hit, he also stands still for nearly 4 seconds, allowing a very slow and delayed counterattack to land before he backs off. Eve, using only her pink energy and walls, is obviously unable to do something, and her utter refusal to, I don't know, simply change Doc's bracelets into water, manipulate the air the centipedes are breathing into a toxic gas, increase the density of the air to slow them down, change the cocoon things the heroes are trapped in to bubbles or something else from a long range. Yes, she has a massive range to her abilities. Or take 1,000 other options available to her, finds herself agreeing with Doc that these centipedes and worms are too strong for them. You know, the girl that can manipulate almost anything and the member of the planet-destroying race who can move faster than people can react? So they shift to freeing the heroes. Great plan, I guess. Invincible says he'll cover her by pushing 2 worms on the ground out of the way of the girl that can fly. Why not just fly over them? This cave is freaking huge. Anyways, Eve flies pretty slow and gets distracted a moment, and somehow ends up flying right into Doc, which utterly shocks her. How on earth did the person who did not move end up right in her flight path when she flew directly at him? Oh my goodness! Sitting flabbergasted for over 5 seconds watching Doc, who even says a small quip, she gets blasted point blank, knocking her out of the fight. Eve just got dipped by base Doc while having over 5 seconds to react. The villain that she and countless others have clowned on since season 1. She's reacted to lasers being shot at her, and later this season reacts to Conquest blitzing her. Why are you just standing there? Alright, so Mark freaks out seeing what happened to Eve and tries to push this centipede to the side that he's had no avail in overpowering, and surprise, surprise, it doesn't work again and he gets stabbed and knocked out a minute later. Do you really think this falls within the parameters of suspension of disbelief this series has set up at the beginning? Parameters that were highlighted in both Omni-man's fight against the Guardians at the beginning of season 1 and his fight against Mark at its conclusion. Over the top, yet with a touch of realism, grounding it and showcasing what superheroes would really be like. Instead, the fight with Doc feels so contrived, piloted by idiots who have no sense at all for danger, strategy, or combat, despite having been in various fights and trained in using their abilities. Anyone with a functioning frontal lobe with Mark's or Eve's abilities could have easily overcome the situation. Meanwhile, with the Guardians fighting Omni-man, that's a toss-up even with Red Rush's abilities. And this isn't the only scene that does this. In Season 3 alone, we have Multi-Paul being able to slow Invincible down by jumping on him, despite Invincible lifting an iceberg earlier that episode. Powerplex outrunning Invincible in another hostage situation, despite Mark capable of flying to the moon and back in a few minutes. Invincible getting hit by the Mahler twins' nerve gun when he easily dodged it on foot a scene prior. Or the entire second Angstrom fight, where he struggles against the strength of these small metal drones despite being able to split them in half with his hand, fly faster than Angstrom can react, and literally toppling cities the following episode in his fight with Conquest. Even if these drones are made from a special material, which the show does not specify, they are still far too small and move far too slow to have enough power to overwhelm Invincible. These drones also get a buff halfway through the fight where they're able to cut Viltrumite's skin, despite Invincible being pelted with 1,000 of them before this moment. In Season 1, Mark got messed up a lot, but he was significantly weaker than he is now, and was literally a brand new superhero. He had no idea what he was doing. While there were certainly moments that fell outside of the suspension of disbelief, how are you alive? There typically wasn't anything too egregious. By Season 3, he has fought 3 Viltrumites, one of which was actually attempting to kill him and not holding back. He's gone through training with his father, training with Cecil, and has over a year of superheroing under his belt. A lot of people say it's just Mark holding back, but in this video, I go over why that's a pretty flimsy excuse. Mark is much stronger and faster than people typically give him credit for. So if you're interested in that, it'll be linked below in the Invincible is Whack playlist. As soon as you begin thinking logically and understand the capabilities of these protagonists, the stakes of the series post Season 1 in many cases are dismantled, unless a Viltrumite is involved. There are, of course, exceptions to this. There's a reason the show seems to become inexplicably better when a Viltrumite is on screen, and that's because the show can actually make the stakes a genuine threat to the characters. The series that first explored how powers worked, questioned their implications, and showcased them in a relatively realistic manner has become contrived. Characters are as strong or weak as the writers need them to be. They don't learn from past experiences, experiment with their abilities, or ponder how they can be more effective. We see them train and even watch Eve go to school to understand how to better utilize her ability, but when has that training ever showcased a direct correlation with how the individual is performing? Just look at how they gassed up Mark in Season 3's training arc for him to lose like a clown against Doc. You'll have throwaway scenes where a character professes how strong they are, yet struggle against a villain of the week with no notable abilities. Invincible is ignoring the roots of what made it so great and special. That's why we don't have scenes of villains getting taken out in a second by truly overpowered abilities, or casual banter of stopping an alien invasion like it's a typical Tuesday. That level of realism and how people treat powers is, for the most part, missing. Like one of my favorite scenes when Nolan is talking to Mark about responsibility when Mark is just trying to get back to his room. I think every kid experienced this at some point, yet it's seen through a superhero perspective. I love this! Now everything is serious and being a superhero is brutal because we need more gore and stakes in the show. Even though you've given 2 of the main leads some of the most overpowered abilities capable of dealing with almost any situation. But they struggle week to week against villains and stakes that don't really make much sense. Why do they have such little contemplation about their abilities? Contrived is the only word I can use. Remember when I went over how Viltrumite flight had a whole explanation in this show? Want to know how many times the series ends up using that? None. Mark, beyond that scene, has never had a moment of actually working to better incorporate his flight into combat. Instead, we see him just suck slightly less at flying, get faster, and never think about it. The logic that was applied at the beginning of the show is now only applied when convenient, shackling characters like Eve who have boundless potential to sit in a sideline role, despite her capabilities, such as freezing Conquest by increasing the density of the air. This move alone defeats 99% of the villains introduced in this series, yet she only pulled it out once. You have other characters like Immortal, who was once one of the strongest heroes on the planet, capable of causing harm to Omni-Man, now practically a punching bag in the living embodiment of the Worf effect. And then other characters like Rex, who had a decent ability at best, are now suddenly able to kill a Viltrumite despite the feat being far beyond what he has ever been shown capable of. All for dramatic flair. Invincible has sold out its initial curiosity of superheroes and powers with a touch of realism in order to have an easier time writing, because it's difficult to write a logically consistent story where powers are involved. But that just leaves us with worse writing and contrived stakes. Although, don't get this confused that this only happens after Season 1. Like, did you know Adam Eve first uses atom manipulation in like episode 5, despite being in 4 fights before this? Each of which it would have been incredibly useful in. Why does she reveal a supremely broken ability in an argument with her parents? Why has she never used this before? So the cracks in the expectation Invincible sets begins rather early on. Before moving on, let's do a quick lightning round to show off some others I didn't highlight that are more nitpicks than massive critiques in the show. Alan running from a bunch of small laser blasters after surviving multiple rounds of execution from devices with much higher firepower without injury or any issue at all. Battleby somehow being captured without anyone making mention as to how, and being kept in a cell Alan easily breaks open. Unless Battlebeast got captured on purpose and was just waiting for Viltrumite executioners to show up, but the show never tells us that. Invincible having blood drawn from these random heroes, one of which was literally wearing boxing gloves which makes a blow softer, and Reaniman, fluctuating from being able to keep Omni-man down for a bit to walking pieces of cardboard. But that's long enough on powers, let's move on to...
I want to do what you do. I want to be just like you.
For the character section, I asked the question, do characters which are introduced as nuanced, multifaceted, and having agency remain as such, or do they become plot tools for the writers? Season 1, for the most part, has a pretty spectacular character writing. Debbie, Omni-man, Cecil, Eve, most of the time Mark, and more. Characters had such distinct personalities, made choices that mattered, and acted in knowledgeable and nuanced ways. Everything surrounding the murder of the Guardians had spectacular character writing. Debbie starting to be filled with doubts and investigating behind Nolan's back, Nolan lying and attempting to maintain appearances as he tries to prepare Mark for world conquest, and Cecil doing everything he can to try and slow Nolan and not show his hand too early. Each character has substantial sway on the plot, their choices have meaning, and no one chooses recklessly or out of nowhere. But each decision has thought behind it, and it aligns perfectly with their character. I am tempted to jump to drawing comparisons to later seasons, but we first have to address the biggest blemish in Season 1's characters that seemingly affects every other character she comes into contact with. And that's Amber. Now, despite being the easiest slam dunk for bad character writing in the series, I don't want to spend too much time on Amber because there's been 1,000 videos made about her already and how terrible of a character she is. But I more want to focus on how she harms other characters because she wasn't one. She was a plot device. Before Amber and Mark get together, we see that Invincible is already interested in Eve. They have great chemistry, and Eve is just kind of awesome when introduced. Cool and confident, mature and sweet, and to top it all off, a superhero that's down to earth and chill. At this point in time, there was no inconsistency with her powers, she was just a pink lantern. Then Amber gives Mark her phone number, they have 2 or 3 conversations, and suddenly they are making out and dating. At what point has Mark ever shown interest in Amber? He literally brushed Amber off the episode before because he was going to hang out with Eve. And during the scene where Amber is literally over his house, he's getting excited over doing a mission with Eve. You know, because he likes her. He also just found out she's single. Mark ditched Amber for hours, then they start arguing and it somehow ends with them making out.
What?
So the start of their relationship feels really forced, which makes Mark seem shallower as a person. He's interested in a girl and now suddenly he's making out with another that he hardly knows. Amber feels like she's only here to make drama and to keep Mark and Eve from dating right after Eve breaks up so that she can do her character development arc, which the writers could have easily kept without Amber. Just don't have them get together right away. Amber also gives way for Mark to feel stressed about being a superhero, a student, and a boyfriend, unable to juggle everything in his life. So he's missing dates, his relationship is hurting, etc. But we were never given any reason to care about this relationship or Amber. We learn a bit about her and understand why she's frustrated with Mark, but that's not a reason to care. Their relationship in and of itself isn't something terrible, until it is. This breakup is so stupid. Not a confrontation between characters, but a complete plot device to make Mark feel bad and question whether he really wants to be a hero or not. I'm sure many of you have seen many videos breaking down this scene, so I'll spare you. But this also affects William and Eve. William, who has been Mark's best friend and someone who has gone out of his way to support him, gets context as to why Mark has missed so many dates and been a quote-unquote bad boyfriend. Yet just says Mark's a terrible boyfriend and then mocks him about being dumped weeks ago and not knowing about it. What happened to you, William? Mark saved your life twice in the past 2 days by being a quote-unquote bad boyfriend to Amber. You're aware of Mark being a superhero has nearly gotten him killed, yet you treat him like a jerk in this scene. Telling Mark that from Amber's perspective he's been a terrible boyfriend would make sense because William has context Amber doesn't. Oh, wait!
Ugh, I know you're a superhero.
Okay, fine, I'm cool, I'm fine.
Eve does the same thing, claiming that Mark was stringing Amber along despite doing everything he could to salvage the relationship, even revealing his secret identity to her. And Eve calls him an a-hole. This contradicts how she stood up for Mark when he was hospitalized and missed the volunteering event that was so important to Amber, which at the time, Eve knew things were a bit tough in their relationship with Mark missing dates. Sure, Eve was tough on him and warned him how hard dating normal people could be, but she was always there to support him. This culminates in Mark hating being a hero, feeling like he's a massive screw-up, and losing sight of his identity. All things that did not need this stupid relationship in order for Mark to feel like this. He was already stressed from missing so much high school and not having any free time for his friends, and the writers could have easily focused on the trauma from his fight with Battle Beast, but instead focused on this stupid broken relationship. This all amounts to just about nothing, because before he can think about any of this, the season finale kicks off and suddenly he's back on the horse of being Earth's protector. And after witnessing Mark being nearly beaten to death by his father, Amber for some reason thinks this is the perfect reason for them to get back together, when he's more emotionally vulnerable than ever. And they get back together without a single thought or development. It's terrible in every way, and I absolutely despise this. Even the show does.
He and Amber are...
So, Amber's addition as a plot device character actively hurts Mark's character, especially with how they got back together. I kind of threw up in my mouth during this scene. She takes characters that are multifaceted and makes them simple and stupid. Amber wants to get back together with Mark, so it happens. She calls Mark a jerk, so William and Eve do the same despite before acting otherwise. The script acts like she can do no wrong despite her being very wrong. And the show focuses a lot on this breakup, making it the focal point of the story until the actual season finale kicked off, which is incredibly frustrating, because Amber is a toxic piece of trash and never gets called out for it. There's a reason she's made into generic girlfriend number 763 in later seasons, because she was so bad. Let's shift on to Eve. As stated earlier, Eve started off pretty awesome, ignoring how inconsistent her powers are, which we've already covered. A lot of it was a mask for her own insecurities, wanting acceptance from her parents, who have never given it to her, and clinging to Rex despite him being a terrible human being so she could feel accepted. We watch her build a genuine friendship with Mark, and rather than feeling like a shonen equivalent of just the female character the male protagonist gets with, she had a lot going for her. Solo arcs of discovering the type of hero she wants to be, if she even wants to be the hero, and going so far to question who she wants to be as a person. She wrestles with difficult familial relationships and strikes out on her own to discover her passions and learning to stick up for herself. She was consistently one of the characters I enjoyed most. But as soon as she started dating Mark, Eve was practically regulated to just being the girlfriend. Nearly her entire involvement in season 3, besides finally striking a deal with her parents, is just playing support for Mark. I love both Eve and Mark as characters, yet their relationship is so boring. How they get together is boring. Eve folding like a table when saying earlier that episode she needs time to think is stupid. Mark was practically begging Eve to get into a relationship after saying something so stupid, and Eve is just like, alright. Then an episode later, Mark starts complaining how stressful it is being a boyfriend on top of everything else he's doing. Oh, the agony. This is so toxic. Eve acts as his counselor for the entire season, sitting on the sideline, encouraging him and telling him what he needs to hear as he complains about his life. I am so freaking done with these rooftop scenes. There's like 17 of them, and almost each one is just filled with complaining. Eve stops her humanitarian work, which was saving thousands of lives, and is suddenly worrying about finding a place to live and doing everything in her power to bend over backwards to make life more convenient for Mark. She even makes him a freaking business without Mark helping at all. Mark acts rash this season, attacking the Pentagon, and Eve just acts as the ever-supporting girlfriend. Where's your edge? Why have you become a yes woman to anything Mark says? You should chew him out for his rash and stupid behavior, for not considering how it affects you, his brother, or his mom. It's a federal offense! I also expected when Eve got out of the hospital after the Invincible War to at least allude that she is pissed at him for staying by her side rather than saving the people when the world was at stake. Cecil even points this out, but the show doesn't follow through. It gets skipped over and we don't get to see any consequences for Mark's selfish actions. Eve has lost most of her agency and is now just kinda there. She helps out, but her entire life revolves around Mark now. Now for Mark, I mentioned earlier that he's mostly a good character. I say that because he was tied to Amber for most of Season 1, who pollutes whatever character she interacts with. In Season 3, a lot of Mark's actions make sense for his character, so he hasn't had some huge drop-off or lost his agency. While there are some questionable decisions with his character, he's kind of always been a bit of an idiot. I think he's overall intact, so I won't include him as one of the people in this section. Instead, let's focus on 2. Oh, Cecil. You were one of my favorites and still one of them. He's interesting, always plotting, and oftentimes up to no good for the sake of good. But our current Cecil is a watered-down version of what we had in Season 1. Actually, Season 3 managed to retroactively make Season 1 Cecil dumber. Cecil in Season 1 used everything at his disposal, stopping at nothing to try to stop or even just delay Omni-Man. He was ahead of everyone else, first to figure out what Nolan had done, besides Dark Blood, but also desperately trying to keep up with Omni-Man. A man out of time with few options at his disposal. He was ruthless yet still compassionate and understanding. A mortal daring to face down borderline gods. Probably one of the most capable and intelligent humans. At least until the plot decided he shouldn't be anymore and retroactively went back to make him look kind of dumb. Remember when they revealed that Cecil knew from the beginning that Nolan was lying and he never actually trusted him? Huh. So when all the Guardians died and Nolan just happened to be there on death's door with wounds possibly from other Guardians, you just decided to patch him up and send him home. Yeah, great plan. Meanwhile with Mark, who you know isn't lying, you practically put a kill switch in his head, just in case? For over 20 years, you've been suspicious of Nolan. When you finally get him unconscious in a vulnerable state, you don't take the time to do anything. No collection of his DNA to experiment on his weakness. Didn't plant a bomb or something in his head or try to detain him like you did Conquest. I know at this point you didn't have the sound device like you did for Mark, but Viltrumite insides have been shown to be much weaker than their skin. Do something, at least try. You have more reason to be skeptical about Omni-Man, considering suddenly the most powerful superheroes are dead and someone you don't trust is on the scene, than you do Mark. When first watching Season 1, we didn't have this context. He even says this after the fact.
Nolan was doing everything under my nose and I never saw it.
All we know is that Cecil sees the most powerful superhero on the planet who he has worked with for over 20 years was almost killed alongside other powerful heroes. It makes sense why he does nothing but patch him up. But now with this context, it makes him seem like an idiot for doing nothing. He's supposed to be the world's most skeptical man. When Omni-Man first attacked, Cecil used invisible agents, bombs, fighter jets, a mini Death Star ray, Reaniman, and even the kaiju drugged out on every performance enhancer they had available. Then in later seasons, his countermeasures for Viltrumites become rather tame. Rather than increasing exponentially like it logically should. His only main improvement is making use of the sound device which greatly affects Viltrumites, which he only keeps at the Pentagon and used for that one ship that he places in Mark's head. All you need to do is emit a sound frequency. Why not make it mobile? Arm some of your heroes and soldiers with it when a Viltrumite shows up. Also, why did you never use the kaiju again? That thing, when drugged up, was able to go toe-to-toe with Omni-Man. It's not dead. Mark tied it up after it got knocked out from some electricity. And if you need more monsters capable of fighting Viltrumites, you have Doc Seismic's tech at the ready, able to control the centipedes which can surface to ground level. And who knows how many of those centipedes there are? The GDA made the tech Powerplex uses. Just find another electricity user like this chick. Since her powers over electricity are much greater than base Powerplex, who knows how strong she'd be with these on? Unless it only works with Powerplex for some reason. Why did they even make these then? The show has consistently introduced things capable of at least harming Invincible, yet Cecil has utilized very little of it despite how quote-unquote intelligent he is and it being in his possession. He has everything he needs at his disposal to at minimum contest a Viltrumite. Yet he just commissions more Reanimen despite them getting nerfed to the ground, and has only like 2 of those sound devices despite it being the most effective tool he's found. He was so smart and calculated in Season 1, but now when it comes to dealing with Viltrumite threats, except Mark, he's doing an absolutely terrible job. If that's not taking away his agency, I don't know what is. This is his main role in the story, protecting the planet whatever means necessary. Let my man utilize the tools available to him. The entire falling out between Invincible and Cecil was about this subject, yet he's only making use of 2 things when he has so much more at his disposal. Let Cecil be ruthlessly capable again. How much untapped potential is here with Cecil? It would be awesome if the GDA had been keeping a file of everything capable of harming Invincible and attempted to replicate each one. Like, I would fully expect that, yet it seems such a thing does not exist. Those are the characters that have significant amounts of screen time that I think overall suffer from losing some of their agency and nuance. An honorable mention that I'd like to give that doesn't quite suffer from this problem, but a different issue, is Rex. Now, hold your tomatoes. Rex is still one of my favorite characters as well, but I still have some issue with him. That being, a lot of his development is left off screen, and then is eventually expedited in order to make his death more impactful. Basically, I'm saying I want to see more of what led to the changes in his life. Because we get to see the moments where he is confronted with something that makes him defensive or uncomfortable, but usually the next time we've seen him, he's learned whatever lesson he's needed to learn. We rarely get to see him actually process things. When he cheats on Eve, he goes from being defensive, blaming and avoiding the situation to now apologizing and trying to get back together. He has some retrospection in this scene, but we never see what led to that. With Black Samson, they go from hating each other's guts to getting along pretty peachy after 2 tough missions where they didn't really interact all that much. Yes, doing hard things together typically makes people grow closer, but the series doesn't take time to actually show how Rex and Black Samson gain an appreciation and respect for one another. We also have the situation with Rudy where he makes a body from Rex's DNA without consent. Rex is pissed at first, then they get interrupted, and then the next scene they're interacting as if nothing happened. And whenever it's brought up, Rex just sees the situation as a bit awkward despite how messed up it is. Why would Rex let this go? We see Rex has been changing a lot, and there are events that suggest why he is changing, but never the in-depth retrospection that we get for other characters also going through big changes such as Omni-man and Mark. When the writers attempt Rex's really big change in Season 2 where Rex starts genuinely becoming a better person, they use death flashing before his eyes as the crux. And when he begins talking to Mark about how much he regrets how he has acted in the past, they immediately shift to Mark's problems. In this scene, Rex literally calls life flashing before his eyes bullcrap, and that's what the writers use. Why not have a therapy session, or seeing a little into his past, or him having a heart-to-heart with others, talking with Eve or Kate and apologizing? He doesn't get to have a realistic moment or moments where he gets to see these people and actually realizes what he's done. Instead, the writers practically give him a vision, and suddenly he's changed for the better. Eve literally visits him in the hospital and they talk about Mark. You just had the biggest realization of your life, how awful you were to the people you cared most about, and you decide to talk about Mark and interior modeling? Why? The only exception is Ray, who wasn't involved in most of the development he had to go through. But I'll talk about that more in the plot section. It's like the author planted the seeds, we turn around and suddenly it's a sprout. We turn around again and suddenly it's a tree. But we never got to see the water or sunlight that the plant received, and a tree turning up this fast doesn't happen. But the writers get away with it because he's the most lovable jerk on the planet. Like, I love Rex, but people saying he has the best character development and writing in this series when I see so many gaps in his stories doesn't track, especially when the authors use such a lazy excuse as life flashing before your eyes as the reason he suddenly becomes a better person. Rex is lovable and fun, but he should not be your poster boy of good writing when he jumps 30 levels of character development every time we see him. I did want to make a whole section talking about romantic relationships in this series because, for the most part, I think they are written pretty poorly. But not all of them. I've already talked about a couple of them, and this video is starting to get long, so I'll leave this here.
So you lied to us about who you really were, freed the Maulers from prison, stole Rex's DNA, conspired with criminals to grow yourself a new body, and you expect us all to be like, oh sure, who wouldn't?
And now for something completely different. If you really want to do what I do, you have to be prepared for anything.
No one is going to pull their punches.
This will definitely be our shortest section in this video, and I want to start off by focusing on how this series handles death, or lack thereof later on. When Invincible first began, we witnessed the murder of the entire Guardians of the Globe. Well, almost everyone.
Where is Omni-man?
Showing us that anyone, no matter how powerful, could die in this series. It's not a show that was going to hold back its punches. Up close throughout the entire series, we witness innocent civilians die in brutal ways, and the trauma it brings to those trying to save them. It was shocking to see. A show willing to kill off characters at the drop of a hat. Willing to maintain bringing powers and fights between superheroes to their ballpark logical conclusion. Oh wait, they don't do that anymore. Which also means... Dear goodness, the amount of fake-out deaths has been utterly ridiculous and so frustrating. This show has become a coward, unwilling to kill off anyone yet still trying to be as gritty as it once was. And when they do muster up the courage to actually kill off a character, they make sure you have death flags the size of those massive car dealership flags to prepare the audience for the death, because it's just going to be so heavy. I know there's some crazy stuff coming later on in the comics, but I'm just talking about what has been in the show. In season 2 and 3 alone, there have been 12 fake-out deaths. Mauler twins, Angstrom twice, Kate, Ray, Rex, Titan, this guy, Liu, Eve, Shapesmith, and finally Conquest! You can technically add Alan to that list as well. Death has become such a cheap term. It's like the series is jingling keys in front of us, pretending it's as gritty as it once was, yet unwilling to accept the consequences of having a gritty series, such as allowing characters to die. In Rex's case, they made sure everyone knew it was coming, giving him a romance and saying lines like this.
For the first time in my whole miserable life, I'm kind of in a good place.
And I'll be right back. Like, come on, this entire conversation is just one massive death flag to help prepare us and feel sadder when the son of a gun is finally gone. It wasn't a gritty death like I would expect from something like Invincible, but more like a freaking shonen. Rex stays behind to sacrifice himself for the others, informing them to let Ray know he is sorry. A villain far more powerful taunts him as he makes a final-ditch effort. Rex says one last quip before destroying himself along with the villain. A truly noble sacrifice. This is some bullcrap, man. It would have felt much more in line if the explosion only injured the variant, which it realistically only should. This is a small explosion. And just kind of pissed him off. And then he tries to hunt down the others that escaped, and you can take the story from there. Have someone else clutch up. Now, I'm not saying all the fake-out deaths should have been real, but that the writing should have been different. 2 season finales in a row have ended with Mark believing he has killed a villain by crushing their freaking skull. Like your brains are spaghetti, and both times they've been brought back. Mark believing he is killed has greatly impacted his character. But once again, the series hasn't followed through because he hasn't actually killed. This makes the stakes and the consequences feel cheap, because we know that the authors are unwilling to kill characters off, and have avoided this reality of Mark being a killer twice. And if they do kill a character, they make a massive deal about it, practically spelling it out before it happens. So when a known character receives a mortal wound or is killed, it holds no weight, because I know a scene later they're gonna be revived, heal themselves, or some other bullcrap will happen. Death has lost so much meaning in this series, utterly dismantling the stakes the show once had. If there aren't any clear death flags, I legitimately don't worry about the characters. Without reading the comics, I felt it was abundantly clear watching the fight with Conquest wouldn't result in any named characters dying. When Conquest started ripping Oliver apart, I knew he'd be fine. When he punched a hole in Eve, I knew she would revive somehow. And when finally Mark crushed his skull, I knew somehow, some way, the writers would keep Conquest breathing because he's a cool and popular villain. And what do you know? I'm not saying fake-out deaths are inherently bad, but when it's your go-to for every freaking situation and you hardly ever follow through with the threat of death, despite your series establishing itself with multiple character deaths, it's going to come across as a really weak and predictable way to try and build stakes. There are other ways to build stakes. personal dynamics that suffer, injuries with lasting consequences, trauma and PTSD, and more. And the series does utilize these to varying results, but it relies the most on fake-out deaths. And as cheap as they are, the series makes them even cheaper. Like, Rex had his back and stomach sliced open, hand bitten off, and took a freaking bullet to the dome. He's in the hospital 1 episode, and the next he's back on the field doing superhero work, and the only evidence he had such a devastating event happen to him is that he gets a little shaky before the fight. What? No physical therapy? No struggling with any mental disabilities when part of your brain was frickin' blown out? Not even a scene of normal therapy, working through almost dying and watching his comrades be torn to shreds, who somehow also didn't die. Rex doesn't even have a frickin' scar on his forehead. You'll have characters get their spine folded like a lawn chair and somehow be back up on their feet within a week acting like it was normal Tuesday activity. What happened to these superhuman characters actually having to walk through things like a normal person? We even see Omni-Man, who has repressed emotions, think through things more. Mark and Omni-Man get away with not needing to be in the hospital long because they're Viltrumites. They're capable of healing incredibly fast. Last time I checked, characters like Rex and other Guardians don't have that luxury. Even with advanced medical technology, it seems like a pretty flimsy excuse for them to get on their feet this quickly. What also hurts the series is that it's continued to inflate the stakes that should be unproblematic. Remember how in season 1 Mark was struggling a bunch because of his inexperience? Now let's reintroduce a ton of the villains he struggled against now a season or 2 later, when he is way stronger, faster, and now trained. And let's have him struggle again. Other heroes struggle as well with threats they should be able to deal with. Are you excited to see Doc Seismic, the Martian Sesquids, and a guy with a gun for an arm for the 3rd time? They'll get some upgrade and now they're capable of handling a Viltrumite or some other incredibly powerful heroes. Some of the repeat villains manage to be interesting, such as the Muller twins, but others feel so lazy. Like, how in the world are some of you alive or even being presented as big of threats as you are? This wouldn't be a problem if the series utilized some of the other heroes more often, allowing them to shine in some of the smaller fight scenes and saved Mark and Eve for the really big fights. It would also work if Mark and Eve just had a moment of them truly overpowering a villain that is no match for them without breaking a sweat. One Punch Man does this very well, keeping Saitama reserved because he's so strong that no fight is really a threat to him, but he isn't everywhere and he gets lost often. So for the other characters, there are real stakes. They are fighting for survival, to protect others, and usually forced to try and overcome an adversary stronger than them. And when Saitama does arrive, he really gets to shine in those moments. It doesn't have to be the same for Mark because his fights will probably always be tough, but give him and the other characters some moments to shine, man. Allow there to be genuine personal stakes for the characters we care about. At the beginning of the series, we had the interesting dynamics of the Grayson family that was breaking apart before they even knew it, betrayal between Nolan, Cecil, and Art. The series wrapped up with lines like,
"What will you have after 500 years?"
You, Dad. I still have you.
But now Mark is with Eve and the relationship is so hollow. Oliver has been added, but he did nothing but lie and be a turd until actually getting himself together for the Invincible War and Conquest fight, and there's no living Guardian I really care about since Rex is gone. And some of the characters that get development this series I hate, such as Duplicate and Immortal. There was the beef between Cecil and Invincible, but it just kinda gets resolved. Debbie is still pretty solid though. While I'm excited for a lot of the fights against Viltrumites coming up, most of the personal stakes I could care less about besides Omni-Man and Alan coming back. Best of bros, by the way. In season 1, I was invested in so many characters and where their journeys were going, but now I just hope the fights are good and pray Mark doesn't do anything stupid. This also means I don't care much for anything that's not a Viltrumite threat, because as stated before, the threats feel inflated, like fake stakes, making multiple episodes just feel like filler before the actual story picks up again. I never had this problem in season 1 because there was a point in each adventure, a development to be had for Mark growing as a superhero. But now he's grown significantly as a superhero, yet we still get similar results as season 1, a punching bag for the story. The story goes the way the writers want it to go, and they'll ignore anything pre-established in order to make that happen. Remember when Omni-Man killed the Guardians of the Globe because they were a really big threat to him conquering the Earth? Yet when the Invincible War takes place, about 20 Invincibles show up. And somehow there's just tons of heroes at least capable of standing up to, and in some cases overpowering some of these variants. At least 12 variants died. And while they range in strength, some being weaker or stronger than mainline Mark, did Omni-Man just not consider these heroes threats? Did Cecil just not have their contact information when Omni-Man was destroying Chicago and threatening the planet? If like an army of 50 heroes all capable of at least injuring a Viltrumite show up, some capable of even defeating weaker ones, Omni-Man would have gotten rocked, especially considering he had to fight the Kaiju, Reaniman, Immortal, and Mark. Yet this series acted like Cecil had no options and the planet was doomed. Immortal lost to a Mark variant, and some heroes, at least from what the show displayed, seemed to solo their own. And Immortal in at least episode 1 seemed to be one of the tougher Guardians. Omni-Man did go for him first. So what's the logic in this? While Omni-Man was undoubtedly the strongest hero on the planet, from what the Invincible War showed us and how hard it was for Omni-Man just to take out 7 heroes, it doesn't make sense that he and Mark could conquer the planet alone. Would they kill a lot of heroes? Yes, but I think they'd lose pretty handedly, unless they wiped them out one at a time. Yet, in the same season as the Invincible War, Doc nearly wipes out a majority of the heroes in the US. Like I said, it's whatever the writers want without consulting anything pre-established. When Conquest shows up, suddenly there's no one capable of dealing with Viltrumites despite there being like 20 Viltrumites on the planet a week before that were contested their entire stay. Yes, Conquest is stronger, but the heroes didn't have cold feet before, and once again, a small army of them would be able to take on Conquest based on how effective they were against the Mark variants. But that's inconvenient for the writers, so it doesn't happen without any explanation. In conclusion, Invincible when starting out set some pretty spectacular and unique expectations for itself. The series was grandiose as any superhero story, threats beyond the stars, alternate dimensions, monsters, metahumans, magic, villains, and more. Yet it maintained a level of realism, daring to ask questions many series have ignored for decades. The show introduced characters with multifaceted motivations veiled behind mystery, tact, and personality that held agency, where each of their choices mattered. And it introduced a plot that kept you questioning, with stakes that kept you on the edge of your seat, and a story that kept you coming back for more. It was everything I could have wanted out of a superhero story. But as it continued on, little by little the writing began to let go of these things. That level of realism comes and goes at the writer's convenience. Those unique questions that were asked are brushed to the side, ensuring Invincible fits among the other superhero stories. The only difference being a mature tag slapped onto it. These characters, once so free and resourceful, became shackled, given a designated role to fill, only let out of such roles on special occasions. And that plot that once was so engaging has become muddied. The core of the story is strung so loosely between filler episodes with contrived stakes that we sit here twiddling our thumbs waiting for the next big arrival of a Viltrumite, because we know the episodes in between probably don't matter much. And if they do, will it cover a character that we don't care much about? Or later be ignored because a writer didn't think to consult pre-established lore in the show? I miss what Invincible was, when I could watch the show eagerly, waiting for what comes next, knowing the writers had surprises in store for me, and a plot that explored something new in the superhero genre. When I didn't have to make so many excuses and hand waves for the writers in order for things to make sense. Now things are contrived, forced, and disjointed. It's lost a lot of the magic it had. And I don't know if the series will ever get that back. As I said earlier, I still really enjoy this series. I want to see more awesome fights between Viltrumites, to see what happens to Alan, Omni-Man, and Mark. I plan to continue watching it despite its many flaws. I hope the coming seasons are filled with impeccable writing that makes this video feel out of date, but I feel it's unlikely. But we'll just have to wait and see. If you've watched this entire video through, first of all let me say, thank you so much. It has taken me months to put this video together from start to finish, and whether you agree or disagree with me, you listened to all my arguments all the way through, so you're freaking awesome. This is the first time I've done a long form video, so this is very experimental. So let me know what you thought about it. Even if I don't respond to your comment, I do read them all. So let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree or disagree with me? Is there something I represented wrong or you have a different interpretation of? Thank you so much once again. I've watched so much Invincible over the past couple months that I'll probably take a break from it for a little bit, but I'll come back to the series, and in the meantime, I have a bunch of other awesome videos planned. So have a wonderful day or night, God bless, and I'll catch you next time.